Yeah, so let's move on. So some of the things to think about, during your draft. So first and foremost, we've been talking about preparing for your draft, but actually, you're preparing for it, and then prepare yourself when you show up on that actual draft day. Show up with your rankings, or if you did your own rankings, show up with them, or print out the rankings from whatever site, hopefully Red Zone Warriors, that you guys used. I'd also recommend showing up with an ADP list. That's the average draft position list. It's really good. There's several sites that have it. We typically go to Fantasy Football Calculator, and bring a cheat sheet with you, because that way you can look at where guys are going. You don't want to reach too far for guys. We'll talk about here moving in a little bit, but you can reach a round or so, but just make sure you don't reach 4 or 5 rounds because you like a guy when you can just wait a couple rounds and definitely get him. So that's why you have the ADP list there. It's just a helpful tool. There are also many software programs that you can use. You can import in your own rankings if you'd rather. Jay talked about Draft Wizards at Fantasy Pro. That is a great site. You can do a mock draft in like 10 minutes literally, so you can get through a lot more mocks and so forth. And it has the ability, again, to input your own keepers and your own rankings and your tiers into these draft softwares. So you can actually take your computer to the draft, open up this software, and it'll prompt you as to which guy, according to your own rankings or the rankings that you trust, is who they recommend you drafting in that position. Yeah, so that definitely covers that. Jay, anything else you can think of for what you do during your draft?
Yeah, really important here is to be safe in your first couple rounds of your draft. You don't want to get crazy and reach for anybody in the first 2 to 3 rounds. I'd even say 4 rounds of your draft. Don't reach for anybody in this time. I mean, and you got to think about it. The mantra has been you can win your league with the first couple of rounds, but you can also lose your league in the first couple of rounds. 50% of the running backs that are drafted in the first round don't end up at the end of the year with scores that reflect that they should have been drafted in the first round. So, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, there's, 5, 6 running backs drafted in the first round, maybe 7, but half of those guys probably aren't going to finish like they should have been drafted there. So you might want to consider taking higher end wide receivers there. It's a safer pick, it's a safer bet. Now, I've always been a little bit of a gambler. I like to take the running backs in the first round, but it has come back to bite me in the ass. That is the truth. And, I will attest to it. Be safe. Don't be stupid. You can take those flyers in, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th rounds. You can take flyers on guys, and they'll hopefully pan out for you. Jim, anything to add?
Yeah, actually, I would just like to add to that. I think I saw recently that statistics showed that 30% of your scoring throughout the year actually comes from your first 2 rounds. So you definitely don't want to gamble too heavily on any of those first 2 rounds. 3rd and 4th round, yeah, you might be able to maybe reach around for a guy, but you don't want to go too deep there. And like you're saying, definitely later in the draft, that's when you can start to gamble a little bit more. But what I want to talk about really, though, is the position runs, okay? So basically what happens, you'll see everyone, maybe drafting in the rounds 5, 6, 7, maybe see nothing but a whole round of just running backs being drafted. And when that happens, basically when everyone's zigging, sometimes it pays off to zag and basically go against that. So necessarily you don't need to follow the trends of what's going on with other guys. And sometimes by you going ahead, you can pick up that wide receiver that everyone else, thought they could wait another 2 rounds to get what they wanted, but you got him instead. So there's just something to kind of consider. If you plan on waiting on a QB and tight end, make sure to keep track of how many of those other guys have drafted one. So, definitely keep that in mind. Obviously, there's the marquee 4 or 5, quarterbacks, and if obviously those are all gone in the first 3 to 4 rounds for some reason, then, you got to obviously keep an eye and say, okay, well, I'm going to streamline quarterbacks late. But make sure that you get a steady top 10 guy you think usually by around 9 or 10 they can be available. So
absolutely. You got to pay attention just to what those guys are doing, how they're drafting, what positions they've already attained that they may not have to think about for several rounds, and that'll help you decide when you're going to pull the trigger on those various positions, especially the positions of which you only have to start one. That's the quarterback, the tight end. Defenses and kicker, of course, you're going to wait on that, but yeah, definitely pay attention to that. And as Jay said earlier, again, you really can't win your league in the first couple rounds, but you definitely can lose it. So play it safe. if you have a top 4 pick, 5 pick, those running backs are pretty much a must. But after that, it's really wide open this year. So maybe think about going with a wide receiver. They have a much better retention rate for finishing in the rounds in which they are drafted, especially those upper echelon guys in the first couple rounds. So, but I think the biggest message here, is you have to be flexible. I mean, you can do hundreds of mock drafts like Cushman and I do and so forth. And you need to have a general plan, especially if you know what position you're drafting from. Like if you have a top 4 pick, like I said before, likelihood you should be drafting one of those stud top running backs. But after that, it's pretty wide open. Do you go Jimmy Graham? Do you go Calvin? Or do you run the risk of, picking some other running back that may or may not finish in the top 10 at the end of the season? But be flexible, because what happens is, and we've done this numerous times and been doing this for years, is that, if you have a concrete plan, in all likelihood, when you get to your actual draft, not a mock environment and so forth, somebody's going to do something different or weird that you weren't expecting, and now all of a sudden you get flustered and you make a pick that you do not feel good about. That happens in every draft, every year, all around the country, and don't let that be you. So be flexible, have a general plan, but if somebody falls to you or drops to you, snag them up. If you can follow your plan for a while, that's great, but something's probably going to change or you have to alter that. And please, dear God, wait on your defense and kickers. Don't be the guy that drafts Seattle in the frickin' middle of the 8th round. That is just ridiculous. Defenses change all year to year, big time. I mean, for example, we have a pretty standard defensive scoring league in our league, Red Zone Warriors, and actually Kansas City finished ahead of Seattle this past season. So, don't pick them in the 7th round. Wait. If you want to reach a round or two, wait. Maybe draft a defense in the 10th round at the earliest. But please wait on that. And don't pick a kicker till the end of the round. It's just those guys are a dime a dozen and makes no difference. So don't make that mistake and be that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Kickers and defenses, if you are drafting Seattle in the 8th round and you're in my league, I am laughing my ass off while I'm taking a wide receiver that's going to be a freaking, you're absolutely doing a couch shot. Absolutely. But I'm going to be laughing at you the whole time while I'm taking a wide receiver that's going to be a flex play. So moving on, let's talk about bye weeks for a second. You should not be paying too much attention to bye weeks. I mean, obviously don't draft all of your starters on the same bye week. That probably wouldn't be great. But you don't really need to pay attention to it, all right? You want to draft the best team possible. That's your goal in the draft. You want the guys that you feel are going to put you in the best position to win a championship, because that's what we're all here for, is to win championships, get paid, or get the trophy, laugh at your buddies, do whatever it is you get to do. So if you have 2 really bad bye weeks, that's not a big deal. That's a couple losses, and you know what? Maybe, just maybe, you're going to meet up with somebody that's got those same bye weeks, and they're going to be in a bad position. I've done that with the commish a couple times in our league, where we meet up the one time a year we play each other, unless it's the playoffs, and both of us have our worst bye weeks of the season, so we're playing like freaking no-name quarterbacks and a no-name running back and, a wide receiver that may or may not even be playing that week, and it's usually a very low-scoring affair. So don't worry about your bye week. It's not a big deal. You can always mess around on the waiver wire later. The only thing I would say about bye weeks that you might want to watch is, like last year I drafted a tight end, and then I ended up getting Gronkowski in the 7th round because he was injured, which I'll never have him on my team again. But anyway, I had Cameron and Gronkowski, who happened to have the same bye week, so I was basically forced to trade Gronkowski off or drop him, which I wasn't going to drop him. So, yeah, Rob ended up with him. Cocksucker. Sorry. There's a little frog in my throat there.
Yeah, something I'll add there is, absolutely, I literally do not even consider or look at bye weeks when I'm drafting. The only time to look at that, I don't care. And in fact, if I had all my starters out for a week, so be it. I get my butt kicked 1 week and I have my whole team at full force for the rest of it. So I really could care less about bye weeks. But like Jay said, if you're going to back up a player, and I would say especially a quarterback, if you're going to do a 2-streaming quarterback thing and you're going to wait, you're going to grab a Cutler, and a Russell Wilson or whatever, that's the time that you have to make sure they have a different bye week. Because if they have the same one, having a backup does you no good during your starter's backup. Unless, if somebody gets hurt or something, that's a different scenario. But that's really on those guys where you only have to start one, which again would be the quarterback and the tight end in this respect, because we don't care about the defenses and kickers and so forth, is just make sure those guys don't have the same bye week, because you're defeating the purpose of drafting a backup, which is primarily for bye week issues, more so necessarily than injuries, so forth. So Jim, do you have any thoughts about, I mentioned earlier, you don't want to reach too far for guys, and that's the reason you should have an ADP list. What are your thoughts about reaching? What would you tell our listeners, pros and cons there about when that's too much?
First, it's like dating. Always go up, all right? No, not really. But anyways, thing about reaching is especially if you're picking at the turn, so either you got the first pick and, or the first pick or the 10th pick, you can have those 2 picks in a row. You gotta be kind of mindful, and you kind of want to have to maybe reach for a few guys, because you just don't know if they're going to fall back to you, 20 picks later. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, and that's something that can either be helpful or not. And that also kind of, what I was talking about earlier, starting the trends. You'd be surprised how often the turn actually sets the trend for the next round or two. So I think it's pretty dumb to reach more than, 3+ rounds for a player that clearly on the ADP is, just, they'll be there, in another round or two. So, don't ever try to reach more than 3+ rounds, even if, you're like me and you're just super high on Ben Tate. You don't want to take him in the second round. And, by the way, we did make our keepers quite a while ago. So yes, thanks Jay, for the slow clap there. I'm going to see how I can actually just physically drop him. So anyways, with that, I'll turn it back to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's a great point. That's one of the reasons that I kind of like, I don't mind drafting at the turns necessarily. It's nice to get those back-to-back picks, but you have to be really cognizant of what's going on, and you do have to reach at least a round ahead of time quite often to make sure you get the guy you want, because you have no idea the runs or what's going to happen, when you have to wait 20 picks for it to get back to you. But if you pick in the middle, if you draft in the middle, it's not as big a concern, because you're able to benefit from other people's mistakes, guys that drop to you, and you just kind of feel more involved in the draft because you're picking out of the middle. So that's just a little tidbit for you. Another thing I would suggest is to print off and have an updated list of the backups and or handcuffs with you. So go to one of the websites, make sure it's a recent. All right, what is that site that we use? It's ourlads.com, I believe.
Yeah, our OUR Lads, LADS, OURLADS.com. They have the most updated depth charts you're going to get.
Yeah, go ahead and get those depth charts. Print out an article, maybe fantasyguru.com or something about handcuffs. A lot of people, it's a mixed feeling about whether they like handcuffs or not. But if you feel like you want to back somebody up, one of your studs at least, make sure you have a list so you know who that guy is. Then you can check your ADP and kind of get a sense for where they're going, and you can draft those guys in later rounds. And also, this is really important too, everyone. Please, make a list of flyers. Guys with high point ceilings that you can target in later rounds. Especially running backs. Running backs aren't really that deep. There's a lot of injuries. Like we talked about, 50% of the guys that even draft in the first round don't actually put out first round production. So you need to have a list of guys, both running backs and wide receivers, that you believe could step up big time. Maybe it's the second year for them. They're going to break out, or maybe it's just a handcuff behind a certain player's stud or something. Like Terrence West, for example. The guy who's going to be taking over for Ben Tate, if not at the beginning of the season there, Jimmer. In Cleveland, or Devontae Freeman in Atlanta. Guys like that, and even deeper guys that you want to pinpoint and draft and have kind of highlighted in your tiers to draft in later rounds that might get a lot of touches if something goes right for them. That's huge, and that can win you a fantasy championship by getting these guys in later rounds that are going to ultimately either be a starter when they take over in Cleveland like Terrence West, or they're just going to get a big chunk of a timeshare and ride them to fantasy victory. As if you're not watching us, the Jimmer's flicking me off live here. So, so that's kind of things I wanted to touch on there.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and bring us home here on what to do during the draft. All right. So here we go. I want you to be aware of what your other league mates are doing and what their position needs are. All right. So what we're talking about here. Say you're picking from the 11 hole, or as Jimmer would rather we said the 11th spot because the word hole makes him uncomfortable apparently.
I don't know where the 11 hole is.
Dude, you're in Malaysia. You're going to find out soon.
Soon enough.
Soon enough, man. All right. So look. So say you're picking from the 11th hole. All right. And in the 9th round, the only other team that doesn't have a quarterback yet is picking in the 12th hole. And the last quarterback that you feel comfortable picking and having as your quarterback is the only one left on the board. Now, he's going to pick him. You've got to take him. You can't wait around for him. All right? You're not going to get him. Now, alternatively, if you're picking in the 8 hole in the 7th round and the only other player without a starting quarterback is picking from the 5 hole and he didn't grab a quarterback, you can wait because you're going to pick in the next round before him. So these are things you have to be aware of during the draft. You've got to have. That's why we suggest using the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard software. Their Draft Wizard is amazing because you're keeping track of every pick. You're looking at the draft board. You're looking at everybody's team, who they've got. You can actually click over and look at just their roster, so you can know exactly how many quarterbacks are taken. You know, everything's there, and you've got to be cognizant of this, or else you're going to end up looking on the board, thinking, all right, I'm going to take my quarterback now, and the only quarterback left is going to be like Ryan Tannehill or Geno Smith or something like that, and you're going to just be like, fuck my life. So,
no, that's a great point, Jay. I mean, you really have to it's really important, guys, to pay attention to what's going on in the draft and who's taking what positions. You know, we've kind of hammered this home, but we just want to continue that. The only thing you have to be cognizant of that I will say, and this actually burned Cushman last year, as he mentioned, is that, somebody maybe who's not as experienced or whatnot might pull the trigger on their second quarterback before you get your first if you wait too long. And that's just why you have to be cognizant. And that's why you have your draft board. They're all color-coded at all the positions. You're going to easily be able to glance at it and say which color the quarterbacks are and which guys already have one. But just have your list, have your tiers, and be smart about when you pick a guy. Because if you have 2 picks and like at a turn or something, then you can grab a skill player and then wait and grab your quarterback at the turn. So just be cognizant of that. So, well, that kind of wraps it up for us as far as, how to prepare for your draft, what's the best way, some things to think about, and then some strategies to be considering and utilizing during the actual draft itself. So feel free to tweet us any questions about that at Red Zone Warriors. I think that wraps it up here for tonight. We talked about what to do, prepare for your draft, what to think about during your draft, and went ahead and answered some questions there for some of those guys on Reddit. All right, on our next show, we're going to be breaking down the major training camp headlines and position battles in the AFC. So join us in 2 weeks for that. In the meantime, go to Red Zone Warriors, where you can watch previous episodes, see our rankings, and subscribe to and rate the show via iTunes. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and tweet us all your fantasy football questions at Red Zone Warriors. So for the Cushman and the Jimmer, I am Rob the Commish Smith, and remember, if you are taking a fantasy off season, you are already losing. And we'll catch you next time.